Well, there is new evidence of violence in Syria today, despite the announcement of a ceasefire between Turkey and America's Kurdish allies. Video shows gunfire and shelling in one Syrian city along the Turkish border just hours after the ceasefire agreement was announced. President Trump addressed this violence earlier at the White House, and he claimed that the Kurds are happy after the U.S. left them alone to defend against a Turkish invasion.
There was some sniper fire this morning. There was mortar fire this morning that was eliminated quickly. And they're back to the full pause. We have ISIS totally under guard. Turkey is also guarding separately. They're watching over everything. So you have the Kurds who we're dealing with and are very happy about the way things are going, I must say. The Kurds, and you also have the Turks watching, just secondarily watching, so we have ISIS under control.
Well, Vice President Mike Pence is facing heavy criticism for the deal to stop Turkey's attacks on Kurdish forces in northern Syria. The Kurds have blamed Turkey for the violation. Our Charlie Daggett is in the region and reports on the controversy.
Well, it's been a shaky ceasefire and a shaky deal. Not everybody here is happy about it. And as for the role of the U.S. military, there are some serious questions about exactly how the terms of that ceasefire will be implemented. Turkish attacks continued on the border today, breaking the so-called pause in hostilities. 120 hours, 5 days for the U.S. to facilitate the reason Turkey went to war in the first place, the removal of Kurdish forces from a 20-mile-deep safe zone along the Turkish border. But Pentagon officials tell CBS News so far they've received no direction as to how to remove those forces, and there's no change to America's own withdrawal plan. Still, at a rally in Dallas, President Trump painted himself as a kind of playground peacekeeper.
It was unconventional what I did. I said, they're going to have to fight a little while. Sometimes you have to let them fight a little while. It's like two kids in a lot. You got to let them fight, and then you pull them apart.
But it's far from child's play for the hundreds of people killed and almost 200,000 displaced by the fighting. And Turkish forces have been accused by a chemical weapons expert of using what looks like white phosphorus against Kurdish civilians, banned by chemical weapons conventions. The U.S. has declared a ceasefire to a war they weren't even fighting and enabled Turkey to achieve its primary objective, which has enraged U.S. lawmakers on both sides of the aisle.
The decision to abandon the Kurds violates one of our most sacred duties. It strikes at American honor. What we have done to the Kurds will stand as a blood stain in the annals of American history.
Now, it may be telling that Turkey is calling this more of a pause than a ceasefire. Why 5 days? Well, that's exactly when Turkish President Erdogan is due to meet with the real power broker of this region, President Vladimir Putin, in Russia. Charlie Daggett of CBS News in Hook, northern Iraq.
Charlie, thank you. I want to bring in Christina Ruffini and Anne Gearan. Christina is a CBS News State Department and Foreign Affairs reporter, and Anne is a White House reporter for the Washington Post. So, Christina, President Trump just a short time ago said that the situation in Syria is very fragile. A U.S. official tells our David Martin at the Pentagon that they're still executing the withdrawal plan. What does the State Department have to say?
A State Department official told me moments ago that the priority is obviously getting U.S. troops out of the way, but they said there is some assistance going into, number one, ensuring it's safe for these Kurdish groups, that's the SDS or the YPG, at getting out of the way, and that they're discussing with the Turks the evacuation routes and trying to clear a safe way for them to leave and get out of the fighting and to make sure the fighting stops. The official also said that the U.S. is providing some cover as well. I asked the official if they could explain what that cover entailed, and they said they couldn't go into it. I also asked if the Turks were in fact abiding by the ceasefire, and the official said, you know, sometimes it takes a while for these things to wind down. People have to get out of the way. There's command and control issues, and they've seen these reports as well, what our Charlie Daggett was reporting in his piece just before me, and they're working to find out and verify whether or not the Turks have actually stopped firing and abided by the ceasefire, or what the Turks are calling a pause in this military action.
And on the Today Show, NBC's Today Show, Admiral James Stavridis called the Turkish offensive ethnic cleansing. I want to play for you what he had to say.
One way to look at this is that President Erdogan and President Trump buried the hatchet. They buried it right in the back of the Kurds. This is approaching ethnic cleansing, 300,000 Kurds being pushed out of this so-called buffer zone, 70,000 of them children. Newsflash, winter is coming. This is a humanitarian crisis.
And what do you make of what he had to say today?
Well, I mean, the admiral there is outlining in pretty dramatic terms something that is indeed happening on the ground, which is that Turkish President Erdogan is getting what he has long sought, which is a Kurd-free area on his border, where those people go, where the thousands of civilians who are being displaced go, and how safely they're able to go is really not Erdogan's concern. And Trump is trying to make it not his concern as well. But it will result in a, Stavridis says ethnic cleansing, but it will result in the forced removal of what used to be legal citizens in that region. And part of it is being done under the aegis of a ceasefire or pause brokered by the United States.
And President Trump tweeted this morning that he actually spoke with President Erdogan. Do you believe that this pause, ceasefire, however you want to label it, holds beyond the 5 days?
Well, it's in Erdogan's interest to have it hold beyond 5 days, because then he gets his safe zone permanently or semi-permanently, and that's what he really wants. So to the degree that there's some strategic thinking here about how this is going to go in 6 months, it would be in Erdogan's interest to maintain it. It hasn't gone great in the last 24 hours, or 20 hours or so. There has been some scattered skirmishes. Trump actually addressed that today in the Oval Office and brushed it off, saying, "Yeah, there's been a little back and forth, but it's all good now." He said he's very happy with the way it's going. I think time will tell in maybe 2 days' time, really, whether it is holding.
And you wrote, Anne, in the Washington Post, you said Syria. One of your experts said Syria is sort of a dead end. So what are the president's options if this doesn't work?
Well, the president, he's also getting what he wants here, at least in the short term, which is the Syria withdrawal. He said almost a year ago, in December of last year, that he wanted to effect. Longer term, he has a real problem on his hands, which is that the Kurdish allies have obviously been abandoned. There's a reputational risk that goes with that for other allies. Why would people work with the United States if this is what happens? And there's a potential for a resurgence of terrorism in Syria and in areas that the U.S. used to have its finger on. So that's also a risk. But what Carafano meant in that piece about Syria being a strategic dead end is that the Syrian civil war has been going on for just about 9 years now, and it is relatively self-contained. It's horrible. It's a completely awful humanitarian situation, but it does not have, in his view, a lot of repercussions beyond Syria and its immediate neighbors. I think time will tell whether that view of it is correct because of the problems I mentioned above.
Christina, we heard in the piece earlier with Charlie D'Agata that after 5 days, Erdogan is set to meet with Russian President Vladimir Putin. What is the State Department officials you're speaking to? What do they have to say about that?
They haven't said anything about it so far. What we know is that after 120 hours, which are up either Monday or Tuesday, depending on what time zone you're in, and officials I've asked still haven't been able to give me clarification on when exactly that clock runs out. The U.S. says if Turkey has played nice, which as Anne mentioned is already up for debate, and ceased military action in this area, it will lift the sanctions that the White House put in place last week. If you remember, Vice President Pence was asked about it at that press conference. He was asked what concessions Turkey got in order to agree to this ceasefire or pause. And he said none, except the threat of more U.S. sanctions if they didn't do it. But the Turks came out of this negotiation declaring victory. Their foreign minister said they got everything they wanted, including their perceived Kurdish enemy pushed out of the territory they've held and managed relatively peacefully and efficiently for the past few years. They've had control, and they get control over this safe zone, which will now be monitored by Turkish patrols. And if they play nice, they got a way to get sanctions lifted over the next few days, depending on whether the U.S. evaluates them as having abide by the agreement Monday or Tuesday.
All right, Christina Ruffini and Anne Gearan, thank you both for joining us.